Hi. I have a friend here, and we're going to talk about music.
Hello, I'm the friend here, and we're gonna be talking about the music.
So true. My friend here, Apple Stream,
Yes.
is a registered organist now. I think.
Yep, I am.
Freshly registered. He's also an austere Minecraft Let's Player, probably
Yep.
more prestigious.
I'm big on the craft.
I honestly don't know much about music. I
That's
play guitar and like mandolin and different instruments and stuff.
Well, that's cool.
I never knew how to learn music or write music. And basically all I really know is a general philosophy of music. So
That's good. That's a good start already.
yeah, I study ancient philosophy, as people probably know. So I know that music kind of started out with Plato and Aristotle figured out very early on that there's a type of, since music is expression, right? It's
Yeah.
every modes of expression have a moral like implication to it, right? And for the first like implication of it is sensuality, right? So there's going to be different sensualities in music, which is why the modes were taking place, because different types of musical modes bring about different sensualities which relate to the intellect.
Are we talking modes in a philosophical sense, or are we talking about the classical 8 Greek modes?
The classical
7. Oh, perfect. Okay, I'm very familiar with those.
Yeah, so I believe that the different modes and the derangement of tones and stuff like that, the harmonics, I think they're called.
Harmonics are different pitches that are perceived, or that are, so to say, happening in the sound waves with a single note.
Right. Okay, that's cool.
So it's like the overtone, the overtone series, and everything above the, let's say, the ground tone would be called, like, harmonics. At least that's how I know the term being used. There's probably more ways for that term to be used, but that's how I use it, and that's how I understand it. So if you mean it in a different way, you'd need to tell me.
No, I think that might be it.
Okay.
I know that that type of development came out of the Dorians. The Dorians were like very invested in music.
And before you continue with that, something interesting that I would just interject here. In modern music, you of course have the major and the minor mode. Those are the two big boys. In the let's say in the Greek scheme, you would be calling the major mode the Ionian mode, and the minor mode is the Aeolian mode. But the Dorian mode is actually even only 200 years ago, I want to say, about not quite, but like about 200 years ago, Dorian mode was seen as like the default mode. That is, it was seen as the base one, and the reason for that is it's the one that kind of happens naturally with the overtone series if you simply stack fifths on top of each other, which is also a discovery made in jazz harmony. So jazz improvisers, they love the Dorian mode for the same reason. You can stack fifths really easily without the asymmetry of the scale causing you an unwanted tritone early on. And I hope this makes sense to people who don't know that much about music, but a scale that based on the regular, the 7-note scale for the octave, no matter what mode you use, it's the same. The distances between the intervals is the same with that one. Whole steps and half steps is what I mean here, and there's a tritone in there, and that's the one that sounds kind of unpleasant. It sounds, it's not harmonious, so to say. And the Dorian mode, it has the tritone in a place where it's like really convenient for music making. So it's been super popular, and it was seen as the default mode.
That's really interesting because um, I know a lot of the other modes come from different neighboring regions around
Mhm.
Greece. So it's
Yeah.
really interesting how like there's a supreme mode that is used the most because it derives from like the natural human tone of things and
Yeah,
how
I mean,
we listen to things.
I would say so. It's like the Dorian mode really has a kind of in like direct symmetry in itself. It's if you were ranking them if you were ranking the modes from Lydian to Locrian, which they kind of correspond to like I would say like most happy and most sad to put it like at a very simple level. Lydian would be something like manic and Locrian would be something like depressed, and the entire other range of simply from happy to sad would be in there, and Dorian is right in the middle. It's right in the middle between between the architecture of the modes.
Very interesting. Yeah,
Um,
so like terms like Dorian and Lydian, through the Hellenistic concepts and
yes.
contexts, they've had their own styles. Um,
Mhm.
they had their own distinct thoughts of modality. They didn't really have like scales or patterns in mind. It was more so these distinctive musical philosophies and concepts that were
Mhm.
coming to them naturally, which is a very interesting start to music. And I think Pythagoras was very
Yes.
influential into this sort of coalescing all of these different scales and modes together to his sacred geometry and stuff like that.
For sure, he was fundamental for Western music for 1,500 years or so until they decided to mess with the tuning a little bit. Because Pythagoras, like he had the most strict adherence to symmetry in the tuning system, which meant the interval of the octave and the perfect fifth were the most pure in his tuning system. And it's technically, well, I'm not sure if that's a universal thing, but technically Pythagorean tuning is still the most commonly used for like a cappella singing. If you don't go with instruments, if you go for a cappella singing, it kind of just
Mm.
happens. If you go by ear to adjust the intervals and you give really pure sound, you arrive at that too. But of course, this kind of falls apart once you have like really chromatic music. Once you go through the other keys, it's most stable in one key. It has the Pythagorean tuning system as this its one biggest flaw is its one biggest strength at the same time, which is it has an objectively best sounding key, and the rest are uh, you know they're like continuously worse and worse or less pure with a more with weirder ratios between the intervals.
That's interesting.
So like
So
2 to 3, 2 to 3 is the most simplest, purest ratio that is included in Pythagorean's tuning system. And this ratio is actually not present in modern equal temperament. It's approximating it, but it's not quite like it.
hmm, um, here's something I want to ask you because I've
Sure.
always had this thought in my head, but I never really. I'm not a music expert, obviously, so
Yeah.
but I always thought that between the East and the West, the East kind of has this more simple way of conducting music where it doesn't try to add much, but it sticks to like the basic natural tones, right? Is that approximate? Do you think?
Oh, I well, if you mean by natural tones, if you mean diatonic to a scale, I would disagree. It's Eastern music. If we're talking more broadly, like Arabic, Indian, and Chinese, I would really say no. There's some like especially in Arabia, there's some really complicated music with some really complicated musical systems where they have intervals that are smaller than a semitone. We would call it something like a quarter tone, it's kind of, we would call it microtonal music, and it's kind of microtonal singing too. Because it's the reason for, I would say, hold on, I should probably just go ahead and present basically my, my view on Western music as a whole here, unless you would.
No, go ahead. That's
Okay.
fine.
Which is, I think it's pretty obvious that the one thing that makes Western, or the music of the Western civilization special and definitely makes it stand out among every other musical system in the entire world or culture is its focus on polyphony. Other cultures all have some kind of simple polyphony, usually with a drone. The drone is, it's simple to do, it's simple to understand.
Right.
You have a held note, like, imagine the bagpipe, and then imagine improvising over the bagpipe. And if you hold one note and you play other notes above that, you get basically every form of interval. You get the fifth, you get the third, you get the seventh. You just have to do your melody normally, and it sounds pretty diverse. You have all these interesting sounding intervals just in the song by holding one note. And lots of cultures do that, but only the Western music has basically totalized the system and made it like the whole focus. This kind of began with the Gregorian chant, because that was their fundamental basis for music. Since the people educated in music were usually clerics. Cleric doesn't necessarily need to mean clergy. I just mean people who attended universities and stuff. They were educated in music, and they soon learning the chants and stuff. They soon decided to try out what happens if you displace the chants a little bit. Like, actually, it's kind of something everyone already does intuitively. If you sing a song, if a guy and a girl sing a song, usually the girl just sings it an octave higher. They don't really consciously think about it, I would say. Most people just kind of do that without like a conscious, they don't try to fit in the same octave. They immediately and intuitively understand they can shift octaves. And in the medievals, they shifted fifths. Sorry, having trouble to speak here. They sung chants with a displacement of a fifth, which it sounds kind of interesting. It's a little bit hollow. It definitely sounds just very medieval to us now, but it's the first step to polyphony, because it's not that easy to do. It's not incredibly difficult, but it's not as intuitive as singing at the octave. And they were doing that, and then they were thinking, oh wow, well that's kind of interesting, and we like how it sounds. And then they were mixing that, and then they were trying to use specific intervals, and then they were exchanging it with fourths as well as fifths. And then it just kind of exploded. And then they were trying out all the intervals, and they're making all of these complicated rules. And they really deepened into this concept of harmony so much, which no other culture has really done. And the main reason why other cultures haven't really done this is because, of course, in most other cultures, the music is, first of all, vocal, which, of course, at the time, it was also the case in Western music. I mean, clearly, we're talking about chants here still. However, if music is vocal, it has a text. And if it has a text, you can't just... You have to have this limitation of still being able to hear the text out of the song, right?
Right.
And so I want to say the more intuitive way to handle this, since it's what most other cultures on Earth have done, is to have one person sing this melody, or the text of the melody, sing it, and then make it as ornate as possible, like really complicated turns, really special like sprinkles. This is what you can imagine with like Byzantine chant or Arabian. I think I'm not that educated on what the Asians have done in musical development. So they might actually not apply here, but I know for Middle Eastern and Balkan and probably African music, this does apply. They were ornating this melody, and then if they were accompanying this melody, they were doing either the drone or they were doubling it at the octave. And the more complicated or the more ornate you make this melody, the harder it is to duplicate. So most just leaned into making one person do it really, really well, and then have everyone else shut up, basically. So no, like a big choir wasn't really singing the whole thing. There was one guy singing this ornate melody, and the rest of the people were either singing the drone or doing instruments. You can imagine like Middle Eastern music. There are all of these drums and stuff. However, in Western music, they decided not to do that. They kept their melodies extremely simple. And the Gregorian chants, they did have ornamentations for them, but they were really keen on keeping them as simple as they could without it being unmusical, and them keeping it simple allowed them to double it more easily and sing it in more parts, and it allowed for a greater amount of polyphony, because if you have it's called the cantus firmus meaning the given melody, something like that, which was usually a Gregorian chant. And if it's first of all isometric, that means the duration of the notes is all the same. That means you have a perfect timing. You can easily add another person singing it in parallel, without them getting out of chord with each other, and they didn't have to be as skilled to add more voices to be able to double it. And this is a kind of not self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like a positive feedback loop, because earlier medieval Western music, definitely it would sound more like Middle Eastern music to our ears. There's some reconstructions you can listen to on YouTube on this. But as time went on, and because of their discovery of polyphony, they decided to make the individual parts more simple and less ornate as a result. And this is actually a trend we can follow directly even in classical music for instruments. You have ornamentations quite frequently, and they are more frequent the further you go back. Renaissance music, especially keyboard music, full of ornamentation. Baroque music still has pretty heavy ornamentation, but then once you get to like the Galant, to what is also called the classical period, starting with the death of Bach, that's when it's dated to begin time. And speaking of time periods, that's when you really start seeing ornamentation basically disappearing, because simplicity is also like a direct goal to them explicitly at that point. Beforehand, it wasn't necessarily something they desired. It was just something that happened out of a kind of necessity for the polyphony. And they did use polyphony to create complexity too. That's another thing that I will get into. But yeah, to make the long thing short, Western music made their chants simpler, so they were able to double it more easily, allowing them to create polyphony, whereas the rest of the world, basically, with some very small exceptions, did more or less the opposite, or a kind of middle way.
That's really interesting, especially since because the West is Christian and spread Christianity that way.
Yes, I would say actually that the Christian East is still upholds the more Middle Eastern way of doing music. At least if you go to more Greek, the more Greek you go, the more it will be. The more it will be kind of to our ears, Arabic, Byzantine. You have usually one person singing, maybe multiple. I haven't seen it personally multiple. Usually it's one person doing the chanting, and it's really complicated. It does happen. You probably know this. It does happen that you have a drone and then middle way complicated melody above. But really, the only, and like I would say in the Christian Eastern world, the only people who are doing big polyphony are the Russians and maybe the Ukrainians. Because they were, of course, intermingling a lot with the Western education. They were doing a lot of polyphony, and it's interesting because it's very, I want to say it's a very different kind of polyphony. I can't really point my finger at as to why that is. It feels more steady. It's not any less like grand or anything, but it's a very different aesthetic appeal. I think it's probably because they were introduced to that in the time of the classical period for us. So
Definitely,
in the spirit of simplicity and gallant.
Well,
While the West. Sorry, yeah, you go.
I was just gonna say, I know Peter the Great.
Yes.
He imported like tons of Western, literature, even bringing in some of like German Lutherans to help out hymnography and stuff. And this sentiment was even furthered by Catherine the Great.
Oh yes, that's very true. I would say it's actually a very interesting thing to compare. Even just listening to someone like Tchaikovsky's sacred music. Sorry, was it Tchaikovsky? Yeah, it was Tchaikovsky. His purely vocal works are, I think they're pretty accurate to what the Russian tradition does with its polyphony, and I think it's really interesting. Compare it to a Bach chorale. They are both just choirs with basically no instrumentations and a given melody, but they're so different sounding. I want to say this is definitely a result of the West's slow playing around with polyphony, because at first they didn't actually desire to make like chords or accompaniment for a main melody. The first thing the West did when it realized the potential of polyphony was create counterpoint and have these massive melodies intermingled with other massive melodies, and having canons, like rounds, like it's kind of it's definitely a big interplay as well with ecclesial authorities trying to steer the wheel, so to say, because this was mostly happening in the church setting.
Yeah.
The canon was kind of a creation out of necessity, because church authorities did not like everyone having to learn these complicated melodies. They said, make one and just have them learn this one. And then the composer said, oh, okay, we will do that. And then they made one that overlaps with itself, displaced in time, and still creating really complicated sounding melodies. I think that's kind of interesting and really funny. It sounds super cool. If you haven't listened to like a full, like, I don't know, 6-part canon or something like that, or canon in augmentation, the things that these people put their minds to was insane during like the Renaissance, when they were doing the big experimentations to the possibilities of polyphony. Yeah, they really did not. Okay, so like going out of the medieval era into the Renaissance, they really did not seem all that concerned with preserving like a main melody. They just desired this like great, overwhelming sound of like a big firework. I would compare it, a big firework of music, singing.
Like Wagner, kind of.
I wouldn't. I mean, I'm talking about the aesthetic effect here. It's not. I don't think they sound that similar. But yes, I think my main point stands. It sounds very different, especially comparing like the different time periods with each other, even in the same place. Super different with what they did, even in the same kind of material setup. Having a choir with 4 singers and then put them in a room, and then compare. You can compare something from Perotin from the 1500s in France, compared to something Renaissance 1600s France, and then compared to something 1800s France. It's so different. I think I will give you some links later on for that.
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to.
Awesome. Will do.
My sort of strain of thought coming into this was that music has expressive character, and they relate to like the inner life, like spiritualities, because they always have some kind of psychological or spiritual nature to them, and that's because they relate to the senses and the intellect. Or and near it, at least it was it could like shape like your thoughts or different imaginations you have in your head. different actions that you perform or different perceptions that you think about, different
Mhm.
things. Anyone could do this really. It doesn't have like a intellect level. Like any
Yeah,
like simple guy can like listen to music and like understand, oh yeah, this is it without even having explained.
yeah,
Um,
for sure.
so because of that, in any form of expression, like arts or like icons or music, there's always a moral implication to it, right? There's
Yes.
always a good expression of music and a bad expression, which
Mhm.
people don't even think about really when they listen to music. They just kind of think it's frequencies in their head. I've heard someone say that before. It's uh, like music is just like different like frequencies you have in your head, so it doesn't really matter what music you like. So you can listen to like Death Grips or something where they talk
I
about
mean,
somebody they killed or something.
in the same way that cutting someone's arm off is just electrons in their brain as well, I guess it's
It's
true.
so true. Yeah. So in the Republic, I remember reading Plato said he
Mhm.
hated the um the the Lydian mode and then the Mixolydian, I think it's called.
Okay.
He hated them because he thought that it promoted sloth and being drunk, like uh like being lazy.
Mhm.
Um and it was like what you were saying. What Plato really likes is the purity and simplicity that was in music. So it doesn't um it's kind of like an aesthetic way of viewing music. It's
Mhm.
supposed to be pleasurable and like virtuistic, and
Mhm.
he thinks that indulging, a less simplistic thing, it takes away from the music where it's supposed to bring you to higher thoughts and like higher forms of
Mhm.
living into listening to music for pleasure. Like that's not the platonic form of listening to music is not that you have a sense of like sensual sense of pleasure. It's actually to point to the divine. And I think Aquinas talks about this a lot too.
Oh, I
Um,
think that's fascinating.
yeah. Yeah. So what's interesting when I think about the history of music is that when you said this before that Mozart was kind of like this expressionist mostly. It's not really he wrote very like easy listening music that was
Yeah,
for um uh
aristocrats.
aristocrats, yeah, like the rich people. And it's
Mhm.
interesting because once you are in that post Renaissance type of music, you have people that are involved in like Freemasonry, the Rosicrucian movement. Um
Oh, yeah.
and uh I've heard like stuff like Bach or Chopin. They're in these communities, and even certain forms of music they're like led away against because they of these certain people
I
um,
th
involved in these different movements.
I think I only know for certain that Mozart was a Freemason. I don't know of the other ones. I would highly doubt Bach was part of any
Bach
secret
was definitely
society.
not.
Definitely not. Mozart is proven to be a Freemason. I don't know about the other ones though, sadly. Oh, but I can talk about a little bit about this. The thing you mentioned with Plato. I think that's definitely how people like Bach would have felt about opera. Opera was kind of like
Exactly.
imagine it as proto television. Of
Yeah.
course, in our day, I don't think. I think we have to be a little bit relative to this. If you are given the choice today to watch TV or go to opera, I would say go to opera. It's not like they're equally bad. It's
Oh, of course.
definitely opera is better, but if you're in that time period, opera would have been like you don't really have much else to do, and if you're like let's say you're like an intellectual in London or whatever, and you drink your tea. It's like in your free time, yeah, that's what you would do. You would go to opera and indulge in these like spectacular performances, usually
Right.
with usually with the themes from pagan literature, which I'm not saying that necessarily is a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a fact. It was usually Greek mythology that was being performed.
Yeah. Yeah. And the opera is the same thing. You just go there, and it's like a very it's you go there
Yeah,
for pleasure. You're not
yeah. It's
going
a
there
mhm,
to have this like sort of uh higher. form of what you're listening
Yes.
to. It's mostly to see the people in makeup, singing these
Mhm.
grandiose things, and the
Yes.
theaters like vibrating from the woman's voice or something.
It's definitely like not humble whatsoever. It's I
Right?
think
Yeah.
I think I don't know. I think it's really similar to what the Greeks did in their plays because they also had choirs and
Oh,
everything in
definitely.
music. Yeah, imagine basically like as a continuation of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the church, I know uh, almost all of the church fathers unanimously say that like dancing is bad,
Yeah,
and this is where that thought comes from, because people, they don't really think about music all that much, but like when you're when you separate that pleasurable listening to like the higher thought, you understand that like, okay, dancing is just fully engorging yourself into this like pleasure of music.
yeah.
um and that's why they thought it was bad.
Also,
And even if
dancing. Like I'm not sure. I'm not that familiar with dancing, but it definitely had a heavy sexual undertone everywhere in history.
Oh, definitely, yeah. And it was in pagan practices too. You had the belly
Mhm.
dancers in India. You had
Ah, right.
the Vestal
Mhm.
virgins. They would play the two horns, that droning sound, and would give you into this meditative state.
Oh yeah,
um
like what
the
the
music
CIA
demon.
did.
Yeah. Pretty much, yeah.
Funny.
Even like 1960s hippie concerts, they found out that if you play at a certain frequency, you can get into these more meditative states. So that's why in concerts you see
Mhm.
like this degeneracy where people are taking drugs and having sex and
Yeah,
getting
it's
into
it's
these
true.
different modes.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
they're just basically rediscovering, the ancient pagan practices through, basically like throwing stuff at the wall.
oh, completely. I mean, they're dropping acid and going
Yeah,
through different modes. It's very obvious, like, if you've
yeah.
ever experienced like a concert before.
I
Um,
have, and I have even like experienced like these strange Christian concerts. I don't. It makes me just so uncomfortable. It's like it's first of all, it's loud. It's so loud, and then it's so. I don't know. I don't know how to say it. It's so kind of sentimental. It's like trying to say be sad. No, and it's weird. I don't like it personally. I wouldn't fault someone for liking it, but not to, like personally, I would fault them, of course, intellectually, but I wouldn't go up to someone and
right.
say, "Hey, did you know that that's evil?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting in church history. If you look, uh, Augustine was said to bring the Greek tones into
Oh,
North Africa and bring it into his service.
okay.
But the interesting thing was that he also took out music, because it was distracting from the worship.
He talks about it, doesn't he?
He does, yeah. I
Yeah.
don't remember where, but you can see this throughout the church. Like,
Yes.
if it's distracting to worship, Zwingli did this as well in this church, and
Oh,
he's mischaracterized because
okay.
he's the iconoclastic stuff is like, Zwingli liked art and music, but it was the same principle, that he saw it was distracting from worship, so he took it out.
I
But
did
it's
not know
it's
that.
it's not something that you need in order to worship. It's just the proper vehicle to getting you into that state of mind, and
Yeah,
prayerfulness, and a prayerful state of mind.
definitely,
Um,
definitely think it makes sense that music should be in worship, like by necessity. It's a powerful. I'm not sure if I would call it a technology. It's not really clear to me as to when it came into existence. But music is first of all super powerful and super immediate.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely uh, between masses you go to, compared to like a Catholic mass where they
Yeah.
don't sing at all, and then a Protestant mass, or even a
Mhm.
Orthodox mass. Um, when you are singing or when you are chanting, you can feel that kind of ascension.
Yes.
And that's what the soul does when it tries to know God, is that it ascends along with it.
Mhm.
Um,
I
so
think
it's a, so that the physical practice of chanting or singing is directly interlinked with our spirits, and that's
for
why it's
sure.
so important in like stuff
Mhm.
like a liturgical setting.
I think that's one of the reasons music needs in the liturgical setting to be a little bit boring. Like, for example, that it doesn't change all too much, that you actually do have most of the same things year after year. It I mean, most people would, like, in modernity, they would register that as a kind of defect. Like, what, I want to be stimulated, I want to be entertained. But
Yes.
imagine it as eating healthy food. It's like the very fact that it's the same one all the time. It's not only is it a communal thing, it is a big psychological aid, I want to say. It really
Yeah.
does elevate you if you can know for sure, yeah, okay, it will be this again, of course. And it's not just completely static. We have the liturgical calendar, and
Right.
it does change the songs. And I think the Lutherans did quite a smart thing with the hymnal. I'm not all too familiar with how it works in the Catholic world, but pretty. I grew up Methodist. It's basically the same system. You have the hymnal, you have the liturgical cycle, and you have the songs that you sing each Sunday. And I think the only mistake with that is that people started bringing in, like, hundreds of new songs every few decades.
Mm.
It's the
Yeah.
only, like, besides that, I think that's actually perfectly sustainable system for how worship works. I think it's decently similar to how the Orthodox service works too, with the main difference being that we don't change nearly as much.
Yeah.
The
Exactly.
songs that don't change heavily outweigh the songs that do. And in the Lutheran tradition, it's the opposite, I think, at least. I mean, I have not been to, like, a high Lutheran mass before, so I couldn't say for sure. But the ones I have been to, you have 4 songs, and they're usually songs that are known, but they're not all. They're not. It's not Sunday after Sunday the same one. It's always one from the collection that you should or are familiar with if you grew up with it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I
So
think
I definitely resonate with that. You need to
yes.
make it at least a little bit boring.
I
Um,
agree very much.
the
I think Augustine was spot on when he talked about this. Spot on,
Yeah,
seriously.
and let me just from personal experience, I'll tell you this.
Yeah.
I basically went to like most of the Lutheran churches around my 45-minute area. Okay, so
Okay.
I've seen churches that stick with their hymnal,
Mhm.
and I've seen churches that don't do that.
Mhm.
And guess who was the ones that are singing? Like I went to this church once, and they did the kind of butt rock Christian music instead of the
Mhm.
hymnal.
Yeah.
And because it was different like melodies and different hymns, as a result, no one was singing, and the only one
Mhm.
that was singing there was the pastor. It was very awkward. It's very
Yep.
distracting as well when you're trying to get
I
into the different mindset. So like
yeah.
I totally understand like Augustine ripping music away from that or like symbolizing it.
Mhm. I think that's another one of the really beautiful things about Gregorian chant too. I mean, of course, I didn't grow up hearing it. I've rarely heard it ever. But the thing about Gregorian chant is, of course, if you actually do use it in the way it was intended back then, which is either with a little bit of ornamentation or with a little bit of polyphony, they're just perfect for the setting. Seriously, check out Gregorian chants sometimes. It's so good.
Yeah. I know uh I don't know if you ever heard of old Roman chants.
I have. Yes, they're also very beautiful.
Yeah, I found that the way that chants developed in Rome was really interesting because when I hear old Roman chants, they sound almost exactly like Greek.
Yeah. Yes, but
And
you
this
have to
was
imagine it's you have to imagine the Greeks don't really have I mean, they do have a specific style, but that's just kind of the international way of doing music. You have you have a singer who is doing an elaboration on a melody or a little bit of ornamentation on a given melody. And that's what the West did too. I mean, in Roman times especially. And then it's only after the discovery of polyphony that it kind of started to diminish the ornamentation.
that's
And
fascinating.
yeah, so if you were to develop a kind of, let's say, I don't know if you would call it a reconstruction style or a mixture style of current Greek practices and do it with Gregorian bases, I mean, there's way more educated people in that who could talk to you about it. But yes, Saint Augustine would have heard something a little bit more Greek sounding. He would not have heard like this straight, very plain. Like if you Google Gregorian chant on YouTube, those are usually a little bit too plain to be historically accurate. They are accurate for, of course, later Renaissance settings, maybe as Cantus Firmus. But back when they were actually written down as Gregorian chants, they were performed more elaborative, and that's what Saint Augustine would have heard. So it's a little bit less boring than you might imagine, but only slightly, right? Like if you heard old Roman chant, that's basically it. I think. I mean, unless North Africa was crazy different, which I have no idea. I don't know much about North Africa music.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's another style called, I think, Ambrosian chant.
Oh yeah, I love Ambrosian chant.
Yeah, centered around Milan. Yeah, we can be pretty sure that's basically the same kind of thing that Saint Ambrose would have then had at his diocese.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yes, that's more in the vein of so to say the quote unquote antique Western music. I still really like the, let's say, more plain Gregorian melodies with with a little bit of polyphony, with the quint organum, at least having it doubled at the fifth or at the fourth. It's so nice. It might just be a me thing, honestly. I'm not sure if I would agree if I heard that every Sunday, but something about that is so clear to me. It's like looking at a perfectly still lake, aesthetically speaking.
Cool. I read a bit of Boethius, and he also talks about, he has this kind of radical, I don't know if it's even radical, but he thinks that human nature is directly corresponding to the music. He thinks that music itself is like an entirely character forming device. Like it forms the character of who you might be, or what a thing is. So like the churches will have like one sort of character that they are tied to. You would have like the Eastern Church having their own forms, and then the Ambrosian Rite, having Ambrosian music, the Roman Rite having Gregorian chants, and stuff like that. So he writes in a book a lot about the moral implications of music. And he basically says that the music mundane, he calls it, is the all-pervading force in the universe. It determines stars and the planets and the seasons and stuff like that, like the elements. Like it goes into the sciences of it.
Sounds like the music of the spheres.
Yeah, it's a lot. It kind of harkens to like Pythagorean without the weird, paganism with it. Right. And then the human music, which is the other hand, that's the unifying principle for a human being. So it brings the music of the body and the soul, brings it both into harmony. So it integrates rational and irrational parts and harmonizes them. So
I think. Yeah, continue.
I was saying the music not only profoundly permeates through the cosmos, like it holds the very universe together, but it brings the wholeness to human beings. So that the choir of angels, how they're constantly singing praises to God, and they're singing holy, holy, and the saints are in unison with the angels. That is literally God with the communion of saints holding the world together and like making it his sort of temple.
I think that's very plausible, especially considering the fact that the world was made with speaking, with the word,
right,
with logos, and then the angels, of course, perpetually sing is up. The let's say the higher choirs perpetually sing. I would not. I'm definitely very open to that idea. I think if I read more about the specifics, I could give more insights to that. But I think that makes a lot of sense, especially given how hierarchical music itself is.
Yeah. Yeah, so Boethius says that we just can't escape music. Like no
Yeah.
matter where we go, we're going to encounter some form of music. We're never going to, unless we have this like deep, inward
Right.
type mode of prayer, we're never going to have real silence. So he concludes in the book that the path of the mind is open for instruction when it hears. So when it comes to music, the rhythms and the different modes, when they reach to the intellect and the ears, they have to reshape the mind according to the character of the music. So I always found that really interesting, and I'm sure the listeners, they don't have these different thoughts when they listen to music. I'm sure they just listen to Spotify, on their off time for pleasure, or when they're in the car or something. But the thing about music is that it can have this very profound change in your own human nature, depending on what state of mind that you bring yourself to them, or what you want to get out of music.
Who was the prophet that fell into a trance when the harp was played? I
Oh,
don't
that was
remember.
Saul, because Saul was accosted by demons. He was like
Oh,
literally.
no. There was not Saul. There was a prophet. I said. I don't remember who it was. Man, hold on. I should look this up. This feels highly relevant. Hold on. Prophet. What was it? Was it a harp or was it something like a sitar?
I don't know. I know David played the harp for Saul when he was getting.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I know that too. But I thought there was someone else.
Hmm.
One moment. Man, sorry. I don't know. I don't know my Bible that well. I know the reason I know this is because it was some controversy in the Middle Ages with Maimonides and his compatriots. They were arguing about music as well, and they brought up this. And I think there was some kind of quasi Sufi group, if I remember correctly, and they were arguing against it. And their counter argument was they were bringing up this prophet from the Bible who, received his visions when someone played on the harp. But I can't, man, I don't have it in my memory. Sorry.
Oh, that's interesting. The
Yeah.
Sufis, they have like this kind of droning music,
Yes.
and they chant one thing, and it brings you into that kind of meditative state where you're. But they think the Sufis also think that the music is God. They kind of have this like pantheistic perspective,
Yeah,
which
of
is kind of the opposite end of what we're talking about. It's like
yeah, that's silly.
you can't have God in the music, but the music is an aspect of God, I guess.
Yeah, but I just wanted to bring this up because there does seem to be a kind of supernatural connection with music in at least the Bible.
Yeah.
I just don't have it prepared.
Yeah, so I know because of Boethius and Plato and their different theories, because the Renaissance was kind of trying to recapitulate with classical history,
Yeah.
they sort of brought the same sentiments into that. But I'm not really well versed on Renaissance music.
That's not really my forte either. I only know basics about Renaissance music.
I know there was a guy called Cortesi. Cortesi was sort of like this philosopher composer who's really into Platonic thought, but that's all I really know much about.
The Renaissance definitely, considering its big unearthing of ancient thought, probably had a lot to do with a lot of interesting divergent thoughts on the matter. I want to say there's one of the most interesting things about the Renaissance. It's of course it developing the tuning system further, But one of the other things that happened is I don't know who it was, but someone actually built a kind of keyboard instrument. I'm not sure if it was a harpsichord or an organ, I don't remember. But it had it had quarter tones. It was a microtonal keyboard that allowed you to play not just whole tones and semitones, but also the ones in between a whole tone and a semitone. They were actually going crazy at that time period.
That's really interesting. Do you think that the development of instruments sort of uh, got away with trying to mimic the natural human voice, or do you think that remained consistent? It just got more complicated.
I mean, I think that used to be the case, especially around the Renaissance still. I think they stopped trying to do that in modernity. Like around the 19th century, they just didn't care about imitating the human voice anymore. For sure. I mean, come on.
Do you think that's a result of postmodernism?
I am not quite sure. Like the reason why in antique thought the voice is supreme and the instrument is lower isn't necessarily because of the way it sounds. It's because the music of the voice can carry meaning in words and lyric, whereas the music of the instrument, the music of the instrument is kind of like a meaningless brabble, like from like a donkey going. No, sorry, what noise do donkeys do? You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I always thought that the instruments were introduced because they mimicked the human voice, but the
They
supremacy
did.
was for the human voice was because it was the human voice.
I mean, that's. I think it's kind of the same thought being expressed there in different ways. Like, you could also make the argument the reason the human voice is the supreme instrument. Sorry. The reason the human voice is able to express meaning is because it's the supreme instrument. You can do it the other way around too, I think.
Okay.
I just think it's important to keep that in mind.
Yeah. Yeah. I have because when I speak to Eastern Orthodox, some are very scrupulous and they only listen to chants and they don't listen to any music at all. And if they do listen to any music, they call it satanic because it has instruments in it. That's usually the line of thought that they have.
I know it's I think that's really stupid because the only reason they think this is because instruments are not allowed in church, which I think is proper. It would be like saying owning pets is sinful because you're not allowed to bring a dog to church. It just doesn't follow.
Yeah. Yeah, I always knew there was something off about that.
Yeah, I don't know. It just feels like a kind of I mean, it makes sense they would have an overreaction given our current state of music. And it probably feels really good to be listening to real chants. I do agree. But calling it sinful to listen to, I don't know, like piano music, I think that's stupid. Well, okay, but I'm biased. I'm a pianist and organist.
It's true. So true.
Oh, something interesting. Mohammed, I think, forbade instruments.
He did, yeah.
I think did he forbade instruments or music in general? I'm not sure.
He forbade both, but like chants are totally fine. If you were to dance in Islam, you would be put to death. I know that.
True. Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think honestly, Muhammad was probably getting at a correct thought, but then he was totalizing it with no nuance.
Yeah, exactly. That's Islam in general.
Yeah, right. Like imagine modern Muhammad sees everyone watching porn and then says, "Okay, well, people watching porn is bad. We should now destroy all computer screens."
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's kind of yeah. It's not really. Oh, look at him. He's so stupid for like thinking this is bad. I think that's not quite. It's like more. It's more like he's stupid because he doesn't allow for any room for different levels.
Right.
You know, makes sense.
There's one mode
Yeah.
people have to go by, and back then, we think of music as kind of secularized now because there wasn't really a division between the ecclesiastical life and the secular life.
However, there was a difference always, which is, music outside of church, the folk music.
Oh, yeah.
The music in church. That has always been the case.
That's always been the case, but it's always, I think, unanimously been looked down upon. Just because, as we established, it was for this, sensual They understood that it was belonged to the sensual life, and then the even in the pagan practices and type of music, they would blend a
Right.
lot together. So it would be a
Yeah.
that's the context that like
Mhm.
Mohammed or the church fathers are working upon. It's like
Yep.
they agree there, but it's
For sure.
totally different ends, to completely different ends.
I agree. I agree. I think the kinds of, let's say, secular music that would definitely have its place would be something like, I want to say history. And by that, I actually do mean stuff like reciting epics and poems in
Mm,
musical form. I think that's
yeah,
something that just doesn't happen. And like, I think that straight up died out in like modernity. No one does this. And it's sad because I think the more I look into this, this seems like one of the few places where it's completely valid and virtuous to have it.
definitely. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
because it's geared towards the mythos, right? And
Yeah.
then the mythos
Right.
has something to teach. There's always a logos in the mythos, right?
Exactly. Right. Like if this might sound stupid, but if the internet collapsed in World War III or something, and like no one had computers or whatever, and someone wrote a big poem recounting, remembering everything that happened in a beautiful like poetic prose form, and then sang that, I think that's something that should be encouraged for even for children and stuff.
Yeah,
Honestly, it's kind of interesting because this is actually a completely extinct mode of music. I can't think of a single example for this in our modern times.
yeah. Well, most music sucks now, so.
That's true, but like I mean, like by modern, I mean like 700 onward, 1700
Oh,
onwards.
right. You see, we got like
Mm.
different time scales. Like
Yeah.
when I say West, I'm thinking of like, Western Europe,
Hmm.
and then but for you, Western music is like all of Europe and like
Yeah.
America. So I
True.
got like I got like a different brain for
Yeah.
this.
So like I want to say like this kind of myth singing, like the thing you would imagine the Greeks be doing.
Right.
That is something that happened in medieval Europe, but it did definitely not happen anymore in the Baroque period. And if it did, only like very rural areas. But I don't know that much about it. I know for a
Hmm.
fact it doesn't happen now, though. I mean, I've never seen it, and I've never seen anyone even talk about this.
Yeah, it's weird because if you
Yeah.
read theology, like different church fathers
Mhm.
or reformers on this,
Mhm.
you'll see a deviation between the early Reformation to the late Reformation, where
Mm.
like someone like Luther's like constantly rifling off like different Greek myths
Yeah.
and like characters, and he's relating it to different parts. And then by the end of it, like no one's talking about it.
Yeah.
No one's mentioning it.
It's because
And
yeah.
yeah, there's just been some type of distinction of uh, this type of music or plays, and
Mhm.
was never really revived until it's really like you know reconstructionalists in
Right.
like London or something, or like
Yeah.
nativists in Greece are bringing it back, but there's
Mhm.
no real major movement for this.
Right. The only places where it actually organically still happens, I want to bet, is India.
Yeah,
I
I
don't, I
imagine.
don't, I don't know for sure, but I feel like I'm feeling very confident in my guess, and I would say probably China too before the Cultural Revolution. That is, but
Yeah,
yeah, afterwards probably not, but beforehand, I'm pretty confident in that too. It's something modernity likes to kill.
yeah, because well, most music now you put on the radio and it's talking about
Yeah.
like cars, drinking, or having
Ah,
sex,
big
and
butts.
big butts, big booty, and like doing cocaine or something, or like
Yeah.
sand.
And I'm sad
And
because my man left me.
yeah, like love songs.
Yeah.
They have the notes of what music is supposed to be teaching,
Yeah.
but they lose sight of that. Like they don't have the actual helios into it. It's
Yeah.
just barren.
It's just kind of rambling. All right.
Um,
I hope this isn't too inconvenient. I think I need to go out for a bit. I don't know if you can like pause this and stitch this together, or is this live?
Oh, you know what? We'll probably end it here.
Oh,
Because we're
okay.
for like an hour.
Oh, perfect. Nice.
It was really nice speaking to you, Mr.
Thank you.
Appletree. Thank you for joining my talk.
Yes. I was very fun. Remind me to send you those resources like the polyphony links and stuff.